company that most people have never heard of, literally owns the world. BlackRock. BlackRock controls most U.S. banks, owns all of the major pharmaceutical companies, owns most of the mainstream media, and oversees roughly 10% of all stocks traded globally. All of this has allowed BlackRock to amass $10 trillion in assets, yes, half of America's total wealth. It's so crazy that the US and Chinese governments now rely on BlackRock to avoid recessions, with BlackRock's founder and CEO now sitting on the boards of the influential Council on Foreign Relations and the World Economic Forum. In the words of Henry Kissinger, whoever controls the money controls the world. And no other company in history has had this much global influence, and what's even crazier is that BlackRock did this in just 34 years. But here's the best part: you've probably never heard of them for a reason. The reason for this will become clear later, because after watching this video you'll easily understand the actual world consequences of BlackRock's fast control full-scale invasion, the likes of which we haven't seen since World War II. So how could BlackRock gain so much influence over the world? How did BlackRock go from being a mundane investment firm to the most powerful corporation in history? To begin, we must go back in time to see how Larry Fink created BlackRock City. Larry was born in 1952 into a wealthy Los Angeles family and was always hungry for power. His early years were spent pursuing a career in politics, where he would gain a BA in political science from UCLA, but he quickly realized that politics isn't where the real power is, it is money, so he shifted his focus early on banking and real estate. While in college, Fink immersed himself in the world of the rich and powerful as a full-time member of the secretive Kappa Beta Phi, a group that included Michael Bloomberg and the chairmen of Goldman Sachs. Fink took full advantage of these connections and began a career in the mortgage bond department at First Boston, a New York-based investment bank. It was at First Boston that Larry would make his mark on the financial world, because over his time there, he became one of the highest earning employees, generating over $1 billion. He was unstoppable, and it appeared that he was going to be crowned CEO. During his tenure, Larry became an expert in these little understood investments. However, this success did not come without a cost. He was not going to make this money for anyone other than himself, so he began creating a ticking time bomb that only he knew how to defuse. In 1988, Fink teamed up with some of his old Kappa Beta Phi ties to start BlackRock. In just 5 years, Larry was making money, and BlackRock went from being worth $5 million to over $8 billion. However, it wasn't always smooth sailing during this time, as a power struggle arose over who would control BlackRock's future, because Fink wanted a bigger piece of the pie and didn't want to share his plans for world dominance. So in 1995, he would pressure one of the co-founders, Schwartzman, to sell their stake. I previously mentioned a ticking time bomb that created in his early days of First Boston. Well, this time bomb was now ready to explode, and in 2008, the worst financial crash since the Great Depression struck the world, with traders claiming it was the craziest day they had ever seen in these markets. Veteran traders claim they've never seen anything like it. The oil crisis is causing the most severe recession in decades, which means that life as most Americans know it is likely to change. And the best part is that this was all under Larry's control. Larry believes that mortgage-backed securities were the igniter all along, and because Larry knew the 2008 crash would occur, BlackRock's focus on asset management shielded them from the crisis. In fact, this disaster was an opportunity for Larry Fink, because Larry was the only man on Wall Street who could fix this crisis, and so with Larry's personal connections with Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner, BlackRock secured an uncontested contract to manage the assets of multiple banks that failed during the crisis, allowing Larry Fink to become the most powerful man on Wall Street. However, this was only Wall Street. It was still not close to world dominance, so how could Larry Fink control governments and the global economy? Well, BlackRock made another breakthrough by offering ETFs. These new investment funds proved wildly popular because of the stability and solid returns, and unsurprisingly, BlackRock became the largest player in this new market, sucking up money from everywhere using its new money management platform. If you check into who owns just much any large corporation, you're very certain to come across BlackRock's name. Larry recognized the importance of technology in the future economy, which is why BlackRock invested heavily in developing a supercomputer that predicts which investments will be profitable. This application is known as Aladdin. Aladdin software platform to undertake risk assessments for its clients. It obtains confidential information from banks, insurance firms, and other major institutions. BlackRock has gained insights into the management of financial assets totaling another $20 trillion through Aladdin. BlackRock also has shares and voting rights in several of Europe's largest corporations, including those in energy, oil and gas, transportation, food, and of course finance. The corporation has public debt in the form of bonds, real estate holdings, and still there's more. One of the ways BlackRock has so much power over the globe is through its ownership of the media. Together with Vanguard, an investment business they also partially own, BlackRock now owns 18% of Fox, 16% of CBS, 13% of Comcast, which owns NBC, MSNBC, CNBC, and Sky, and they even hold 12% of Disney. This is evil because it means that any of these companies that decide on company policy must now consult with BlackRock before doing so. And it's the same with big tech. BlackRock is now the largest institutional investor in Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, and so many more, and the list of their investments in companies is just endless, and by extending its reach in such a dramatic way, BlackRock now has control over more than 90% of the media market. Our rock, you see, wears a lot of hats. It is not only an investor, but also an auditor and an advisor. Governments and central banks use a BlackRock subsidiary named BlackRock Solutions to audit them and advise them on bank management and rescue. However, BlackRock is frequently a substantial stakeholder in these same banks. In other words, the company frequently occupies both sides of the table. When you realize that BlackRock's power is now being challenged by other actors, for example, in August 2020, BlackRock became the first foreign company to be allowed access into China's mutual fund industry, which means that BlackRock can now invest in and own parts of Chinese companies. God only knows what BlackRock promised GCP if they're allowed in, but by being allowed in, BlackRock now works with companies that the US has blacklisted. One example is BlackRock's involvement in Hikvision, a CCP-owned firm that manufactures security and communications technologies for both civilian and military use by the Chinese government, and is also infamous for widespread human rights violations. How do you believe your facial recognition technology will affect China? Everything that happens in public can now be recorded, and the money being invested in China isn't simply BlackRock's own money. The majority of it comes from pension funds and bank accounts that regular people put into BlackRock.